1980, Dorothy Jane Scott was a 32-year-old single mother who lived with her 4-year-old son in Anaheim, California. Friends and co-workers described her as a quiet, reserved person who didn't drink or use drugs and rarely socialized. She worked as a secretary for a head shop located across the street from Disneyland. Her father, Jacob, was the previous owner of the business, having sold it in the late 70s. Beginning in early 1980, Dorothy began receiving harassing anonymous phone calls at work. The caller would tell her details about her daily routine, indicating he was watching her closely. Sometimes he would be cheerful and friendly. Other times he would be angry and violent, once telling her, "When I get you alone, I will cut you up into bits so no one will ever find you." As the months went by and the calls kept coming, Dorothy took self-defense classes and considered buying a gun, ultimately deciding against it due to fears that her son might find it. While the caller never gave his name, Dorothy once told a co-worker that the voice sounded vaguely familiar to her. On the evening of May 28th, Dorothy dropped her son off at her parents' house and went to work for an employee meeting. During the meeting, her co-worker Conrad Bostron appeared ill and had a spreading rash on his arm. Dorothy insisted on taking him to the hospital, and another co-worker, Pam Head, came with them. On the way to the hospital, Dorothy briefly stopped at her parents' house to check on her son. She told her parents that she was taking a co-worker to the hospital and, for unknown reasons, changed a black scarf she was wearing to a red one. She then left and continued on to the hospital. The three went to the emergency room, and Dorothy and Pam waited together while Bostron received treatment. It was determined that he had been bitten by a black widow spider, and he was released with a prescription, which he filled at the hospital's pharmacy. Pam stayed with Bostron while he got his prescription, which took about 5 minutes, while Dorothy went to bring her car to the entrance. As her co-workers waited outside of the hospital, they saw her car drive by them at a high rate of speed. The car's high beams were on, and that, coupled with the speed the car was driving, prevented them from seeing who was in the car. Dorothy's car sped past them and out of the hospital's parking lot. They assumed that Dorothy had left due to some kind of emergency with her son. After waiting a few hours with no sign of Dorothy returning, her co-workers called her parents, Vera and Jacob Scott, who said that they hadn't seen Dorothy since she dropped her son off before going to work. The Scotts immediately called the police and reported their daughter missing. Several hours later, police in Santa Ana, about 10 miles from where Scott was last seen, discovered her burning car in an alley. The car had not been involved in an accident, and there was no sign of Dorothy at the scene. 1 week after Dorothy disappeared, her mother received a phone call. A male voice asked her if she was related to Dorothy Scott. When she said she was, he simply replied, "I've got her," and hung up. Hoping to give publicity to his daughter's case, her father contacted a local newspaper, the Santa Ana Register, which ran a story on Scott's disappearance the following week. The day after the story ran, editor Pat Riley received a phone call at his office. "I killed her. I killed Dorothy Scott. She was my love. I caught her cheating with another man. She denied having someone else. I killed her." The caller provided detailed information that had not yet been made public, such as why she was at the hospital that night. He claimed that Dorothy had phoned him from the hospital, but her co-worker Pam Head said that the only time she and Dorothy were apart was when Dorothy briefly went to the bathroom. Every Wednesday afternoon for the next 4 years, the caller would phone Vera Scott at her home. He would either ask for Dorothy, claim he had killed her, or simply state, "I've got her." The calls came at the tail end of the days of manual telephone switching systems, which were replaced by electronic switches beginning in the mid-1980s, meaning that it could still haven't taken 10 to 20 minutes to trace a call, and the caller never stayed on the line long enough to complete a trace. In April of 1984, the caller made a rare nighttime call, and this time Jacob answered the phone. He stopped his weekly calls at this time, which some theorize could be due to him assuming that Vera had moved away, as he'd never spoken to Jacob before. Others have speculated that he knew Jacob and was afraid that he would recognize his voice. In August of 1984, a construction worker in North Anaheim unearthed bones, and the police were called. The bones turned out to be animal bones, but nearby, buried underneath a dog skeleton, human remains were found. Days later, they were positively identified as the remains of Dorothy Jane Scott. Her watch, found with the body, had stopped at 12:30 a.m. on May 29th, the night she disappeared. The discovery of the remains provoked 2 more phone calls to Vera Scott. Both times, the caller asked, "Is Dorothy home?" before hanging up. The investigation into Dorothy's abduction and murder produced few leads and no solid suspects. The owner of the head shop where she worked was charged with financial crimes and investigated for drug dealing in 1982, but he was never a suspect in her murder, and Dorothy would have recognized his voice had he been the caller. Her estranged ex-husband and father of her son Sean was briefly a suspect, but investigation revealed he had an airtight alibi for the night of her disappearance. Years later, in 2018, her now adult son Sean contacted a true crime blogger to provide more information on his mother's case, specifically a suspect that he had been made aware of. According to the blog, this individual's name is Mike Butler, and he died in 2014. He was described as being an unstable individual with an unhealthy obsession with Dorothy, and he was rumored to be involved in cult activity in the early 1980s. The dog bones and other animal bones found with Dorothy's remains have led some to suspect cult involvement. However, the practice of burying human remains underneath animal remains is also done to throw off search teams. If a cadaver dog indicates the presence of buried remains, and a dig reveals animal bones, it is thought that police may write it off as a false positive and cease digging in the area. Mike Butler's sister, singer Rosemary Butler, who has done backing vocals for artists such as Linda Ronstadt, James Taylor, and Neil Young, worked with Dorothy at the head shop and has reportedly refused to speak with Sean Scott about the case. Police were aware of Mike Butler at the time of Dorothy's disappearance, but never had any evidence against him, and he was never officially considered a suspect or a person of interest in her case. Westfield is an affluent town in New Jersey, home to just over 30,000 people. In 2014, Maria and Derek Broaddus bought a house in Westfield, paying $1.4 million for a Dutch colonial-style home. The couple decided to renovate the home before moving in, and while they were working on the home, they received a disturbing letter. A portion of the letter read, "Dearest new neighbor at 657 Boulevard, allow me to welcome you to the neighborhood. 657 Boulevard has been the subject of my family for decades now, and as it approaches its 110th birthday, I've been put in charge of watching and waiting for its second coming. My grandfather watched the house in the 1920s, and my father watched it in the 1960s. It is now my time. Do you know the history of the house? Do you know what lies within the walls of 657 Boulevard? Why are you here? I will find out." Apparently, making reference to the family's 3 young children, the letter continued. "Do you need to fill the house with the young blood I requested? Better for me. Was your old house too small for the growing family, or was it greed to bring me your children? Once I know their names, I will call them and draw them to me. Who am I? There are hundreds and hundreds of cars that drive by 657 Boulevard each day. Maybe I am in one. Look at all the windows you can see from 657 Boulevard. Maybe I am in one. Look out any of the many windows in 657 Boulevard at all the people who stroll by each day. Maybe I am one. The letter ended with an implication that this message would not be the last. Welcome, my friends. Welcome. Let the party begin. The letter, which had no return address, was signed by the Watcher. Derek immediately called the Westfield police, who dispatched an officer to the home. The officer read the letter and asked Derek if he had any enemies. Other than advising the family to be careful, nothing much could be done at that time. That night, Derek and Maria wrote an email to the former owners, John and Andrea Woods, to ask them if they knew anything about the Watcher. Andrea replied that they had received a letter from the Watcher a few days before moving out. She described the letter as odd and said that it made reference to the Watcher's family watching the house over the years. But she was adamant that this was the first letter they had received during the 23 years they had lived there, and that they had thrown the letter away without much thought. The day after, Derek, Maria, and Adria all went to the Westfield police station, where a detective advised them not to say anything to anyone about the letter. Over the coming weeks, the Broadduses continued to live at their previous home elsewhere in Westfield, while continuing renovations on their new home. 2 weeks after the first letter had arrived, the Broadduses received another letter from the Watcher. This time, the Watcher addressed Derek and Maria by name, and also referred to their 3 children by name. A portion of this letter reads, 657 Boulevard is anxious for you to move in. It has been years and years since the young blood ruled the hallways of the house. Have you found all of the secrets it holds yet? Will the young blood play in the basement? Or are they too afraid to go down there alone? I would be very afraid if I were them. It is far away from the rest of the house. If you were upstairs, you would never hear them scream. Will they sleep in the attic, or will you all sleep on the second floor? Who has the bedrooms facing the street? I'll know as soon as you move in. It will help me to know who is in which bedroom. Then I can plan better. All of the windows and doors in 657 Boulevard allow me to watch you and track you as you move through the house. Who am I? I am the Watcher and have been in control of 657 Boulevard for the better part of 2 decades now. The Woods family turned it over to you. It was their time to move on and kindly sold it when I asked them to. I pass by many times a day. 657 Boulevard is my job, my life, my obsession. And now you are 2 Broaddus family. Welcome to the product of your greed. Greed is what brought the past 3 families to 657 Boulevard. And now it has brought you to me. Have a happy moving-in day. You know I will be watching. After receiving this letter, Derek and Maria stopped bringing their children to the home, and they began to seriously question if they wanted to move into 657 Boulevard at all. A few weeks passed, and yet another letter arrived. At around this time, a chance conversation with a neighbor caused Derek and Maria to suspect their next-door neighbors, the Langfords, of being responsible for the letters. Within the community, the Langfords were considered an unusual but harmless family. The family matriarch, Peggy Langford, was in her 90s, and several of her children, all in their 60s, lived with her. Her son, Michael Langford, was considered particularly odd, and the Broadduses thought he was a good candidate for the letter writer. From the Langfords' home, one could see the Broadduses' porch where their daughter had set up her easel to paint, a detail referenced in the second letter. As well, the Langfords had lived in the home since the 1960s, when the letter writer indicated his father had began watching the house. When they reported their suspicions to the police, a detective told them that he had already interviewed Michael Langford a week after the first letter had been sent, and that Langford had denied writing the letter. The detective suspected that if Langford had written the letter, the interview would have scared him enough to stop, but the letters kept coming. None of the letters contained any fingerprints, and they had no evidence against Michael or anyone else for that matter. Unsatisfied with the police response, Derek and Maria began their own investigation. They installed webcams all around the property, hoping to catch someone approaching the house. They also hired a former FBI agent, Robert Lenehan, to conduct a threat assessment. Analyzing the letters, Lenehan believed that due to use of several old-fashioned phrases, that the writer was an older person who was likely well-read. Lenehan also thought that the lack of profanity in the letters was unusual given the level of anger expressed, and that the writer was angry with wealthy people in general, not just the Broadduses. Lenehan felt that the writer was unlikely to act of any of his threats, but added that he believed the individual was erratic. While Derek and Maria were becoming increasingly paranoid and suspecting anyone in the neighborhood whom they felt acted oddly, the official police investigation continued to focus on Michael Langford. With cooperation from the police, the Broadduses sent a letter to the Langfords falsely announcing plans to tear down 657 Boulevard. Since no one other than the Broadduses and the police knew of the fake plan, they hoped that the Watcher would make reference to this in a letter, but he never did. The police interviewed Michael for a second time, and he continued to deny any involvement. By late 2014, the investigation had stalled. 6 months after they had received the first letter, the Broadduses decided to sell the home, no longer feeling comfortable moving in. They initially listed it for more than they had paid to reflect the renovations they had done, but found that the only bids they were receiving were far below their asking price due to news of the Watcher. Over the next several years, the Broadduses continued to try and sell the home, and unsuccessfully tried to sue the Woods family for failing to reveal the letter from the Watcher that they had received prior to moving out. In 2018, they sold the rights to their story to Netflix for a 7-figure sum. In August of 2019, they finally sold 657 Boulevard at a loss of around $400,000. The new owners have declined to speak with the media, and it is unknown if they received a welcome letter from the Watcher. What are the effects of being stalked? Once it happens, does it affect you? In what way? I was 16, going about life and trying to score well in tests to go to a college of my choice. He was in the class adjacent to mine. I've never spoken to him. I've only seen him around here and there. When school was about to end, he sent a slam book through a friend for me to write in. I found it very weird because we have had absolutely no contact, and I refused to write in it and told her that I didn't know him, so I wouldn't. On the last day of school, while I'm waiting in the parking lot, he and a friend come stand in front of me and start saying things and making hand gestures. I don't say anything, so I just walk away as the car arrived. He then started calling up my aunt. I'd given everyone at school her number and talking to her. It never struck me as excessively odd because she never could remember his name, and she just told me it was one of my classmates. He was trying to get into a similar college to mine, so they just talked about that. A year later, a friend calls me and tells me that he came to her house asking information about me. He apparently told her that he liked her so much because she was friends with me. Her dad was at home when it happened, so he told her to inform me. She thought I knew about him, but I didn't. He was apparently also going around my town looking for me and asking other people about me. She told me about how he followed me home and that she found this out from someone else, but I had no idea about that either. Then I remembered all of the times he and I were going in the same direction. his vehicle coming behind mine. But I brushed it off, thinking that it was because he lived nearby. How very wrong was I? I was 18 and I was coming home for Christmas vacation and saw him on the way to my house. He was with a friend. They started following me. I had to get my passport renewed, so I needed to schedule an appointment. For that, I went to the office, and as I was telling them some personal info, he came in and started to make small talk with one of the men there. I got out. After my work there was done, his friend and him were on the other side of the road to where my car was parked. I went home, but it didn't seem like they were following me then. But it doesn't matter really, because they already knew where I lived. I checked my phone after I got home and I had a message from an unknown number around the time I was in the office. It was him. He introduced himself in it. I immediately blocked him and he messaged it from another number this time. The message said that his motive wasn't to mess with me and that he never talked to me in school or did anything else because of the same. He would delete my number, everything he had as a reminder of me, and that this would be his last message if I thought so. It ended with him saying that he just wanted me to know that he liked me. I blocked this number as well. I found it very creepy that he had to delete my number and everything he had as a reminder of me. Mostly because I don't know how he got my number, and we've never interacted for him to have things that remind him of me. I thought I saw him just outside my backyard the next day, but I just rushed inside and locked the doors and didn't dare peek out the window. The next few days, I was looking out the window every now and then. I felt unsafe in my own home. I got back to college when I got a call from an unknown number. Because I'd given my number for official purposes, I don't always know who exactly was calling me, but I still picked up because it could have been important. It was his friend. He said I had no right to just block him like that and that I did not know how to respect people. He said the Stalker changed after what I had done to him and that I was ruining his life and that the Stalker did not know that he had called me. He said he didn't want to be the reason for the ruin of someone's life, so he was telling me this. In order to undo the damage I had done, I needed to talk to the Stalker. He was very demanding and pushy. I said refused. I genuinely felt afraid and traumatized by that phone call so much so that I ran to friends in tears and told them about it. They told me if it were to happen again, I should just tell him off. For a while, whenever I got phone calls from an unknown number, my heart would start pounding and my hands would start shaking. I was afraid it would be them again. I was 19 when I got a message from an unknown number asking me how my exams were. I don't know how he knew I had exams then. Maybe he had friends spying on me. I blocked that number as well. I then proceeded to cut off all my school friends because I didn't know who was giving information about me. I was getting very paranoid, especially when I got a phone call from someone I knew back then. Of course I didn't pick up. Then, I got random messages from a few numbers that I again blocked. The reason I didn't change my number was because I had given it in a number of places for official purposes, and it would be a pain to change it from everywhere. I still don't know if he has people spying on me, and I don't know if he has gone for good, but I still feel unsafe and afraid sometimes. No one should have to go through things like this just because someone doesn't know the difference between fantasy and reality. Getting obsessed with someone to the point of threatening them with your life is downright horrifying. "34-year-old Dale Hay resided with his son and girlfriend in the small town of Weldon, California. Weldon, settled in the Kern Valley Mountains, is a peaceful town that's home to fewer than 2,700 residents. While Weldon is active and lively by day, it is silent and desolate by night. On January 3, 2006, Dale's girlfriend, Dana Dostal, made her usual evening commute home after her shift at a bank in Lake Isabella. As Dana traveled down the lonely stretch of Kelso Creek Road, she happened upon another driver behaving suspiciously within their pickup truck. There was the truck that seemed to be stopped. It was slow-moving, but it seemed to be stopped, so I came up on it, Dana said. Still wasn't moving much, so I passed the vehicle, and I started to go around some of the curves, and that's when I noticed the bright lights in my rearview mirror. The sun had already set, and as there were no streetlights installed along the road, Dana had difficulty discerning the features of the individual behind the steering wheel. I just remember the blaring lights behind me I couldn't see, so I slowed down real slow and the truck went around me and kind of slammed on his brakes in front of me. It seemed kind of like a cat and mouse game. If I sped up a little bit, he'd go right on my tail. If I slowed down, he wouldn't pass. He just stayed behind me. Fearing for her safety, Donna evaded the suspicious driver. For a moment, Dana thought her attempt at losing the driver was successful. It wasn't until she pulled into her driveway that she would spot the vehicle yet again. Dana quickly walked up the entryway of her home. Dale's son, 9-year-old Willie, went outside to open the front gate for Dana. According to Willie, the driver drove away when they saw him. Once inside, Donna emotionally described the frightening ordeal to Dale. Their fears, however, eventually allayed as they found comfort in the security of the home. In the meantime, the couple carried out their nightly duties. Dana was doing laundry. Dale was preparing dinner, and time passed. However, this peaceful evening was later disrupted by a bright light flashing through the family's window. The driver had returned. Dale went outside. Initially, the driver sped away. Dana recalls, Dale said he'd seen the lights flashing in our front window like the guy was taunting the house. He said they were flashing, not just blaring. 10 minutes later, the driver returned yet again. Headlights began to flash through the windows. Frustrated, Dale went outside for the second time to confront the stalker. As Dana was still doing laundry, she did not see Dale leave. Willie had told her Dale got in his Jeep and left. Since the driver established a pattern of driving away when someone within the house revealed themselves, it is presumed that Dale followed the driver after they had driven away. While waiting for Dale to return, Dana and Willie began to watch a movie together. However, Dana grew concerned when too much of the movie had gone by, with no sign of Dale. Dana and Willie got in the car in search of Dale. Dana had barely driven a mile from home when she found Dale's Jeep in contact with a fence. Dale, who was still in the driver's seat, had been fatally shot in the face. It is assumed that Dale was murdered by the driver who began stalking Dana while on her commute home from work. Dale had no known enemies, and the couple lived peaceful, quiet lives. Dana and Willie agree that Dale gave no indication that he knew the person that was taunting his family. As mentioned before, Weldon is desolate. The closest city, Bakersfield, is 50 miles away. It seems unlikely that someone would be in Weldon by happenstance. Donna said, "Nothing like that happens in a town like that. Everybody knows everybody. Nobody can get out. You can't rob a bank there because you got an in and an out, and you're gonna get caught." That's kind of the mindset I had. There's no escaping the valley because you're surrounded by mountains and got nowhere to go, so who would want to commit a crime here? The suspect vehicle is described as a light-colored, full-sized pickup truck with a camper shell that is lighter in color than the truck. The pickup did not appear to be lifted, and the camper shell may have been removed post-homicide. Unfortunately, the case went cold. Authorities investigated all possible leads, but nothing of value surfaced. 13 years later, Dale's daughter, Kelly Harrison, contacted law enforcement in an attempt to find answers. Kelly was disappointed to learn that the case wasn't currently being investigated, and there had been no new information since 2006. Now adults, Kelly and her siblings are fighting for answers. They want to know who murdered their loving and devoted father. Dale's children keep their father in their hearts and continue to seek justice. As of 2024, Dale Hayes' case remains unsolved. Trevor Silverwood was a British politician who served as a local councillor in his hometown of Bridlington in Yorkshire, United Kingdom. Beginning in 1967, he was subject to a campaign of harassment that lasted for over a decade. Someone, or a group of someones, began sending him hundreds of postcards. While the postcards were never overtly threatening, the knowledge of Silverwood's life displayed by the writer was unnerving, as the postcards made reference to meals he had eaten, programs he had watched on TV, and articles of clothing he had worn. All of the postcards were written in shorthand, a somewhat antiquated method of speed writing which replaces common words with symbols, and all were signed with the matchstick figure of the saint. Simon Templar, aka the Saint, is a fictional character in a series of novels by British-Chinese writer Leslie Charteris. The Saint is an anti-hero, Robin Hood-like character who battles with arms dealers, warmongers, drug dealers, and corrupt politicians. While some of the postcards bore postmarks from nearby cities like Rotherham, Silverwood's Stalker also sent cards that had been postmarked in such faraway locations as India, America, and Canada. In the late 1970s, Silverwood decided to confront his stalker by placing a personal ad in a local newspaper begging the writer to identify himself. Days later, he received a card postmarked in the Canary Islands off the west coast of Africa, which read, "Don't be naughty. What a nice photograph of you the newspaper published." Sometime after this, Silverwood was questioned by police over a minor driving matter and later received a card containing a detailed description of his interview. Due to the intimate knowledge displayed of Silverwood's life, some suspect that Silverwood himself was responsible for sending the postcards. But this theory fails to explain how Silverwood could send himself postcards from faraway locations. Due to the signature of the Saint, a character who battled with corrupt politicians, some believe that Silverwood was targeted by an individual or group who were angry with him over decisions he made during his political career. According to Silverwood's son, the postcards finally stopped coming in the 1980s. The identity of the writer or writers, why they targeted Silverwood, and how they were able to know intimate details about his life, all remain unknown. That is the end of the video. Like and subscribe so we can reach our 10K subscribers goal by the end of the year, and comment down below if you want to see more videos like this. We will see you in the next one.